Before we begin this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss our amazing emotional stories that will touch your heart. The Grand Hall of Buckingham Palace was filled with the sound of camera shutters clicking and quiet murmurs of anticipation. President Donald Trump stood at the ornate wooden podium, adjusting his red tie as he prepared to address the gathered crowd of diplomats, journalists, and royal officials. The crystal chandeliers above cast a warm glow across the room, and the smell of polished wood and fresh flowers filled the air. Trump cleared his throat and began speaking about the strong relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. His voice echoed through the historic hall as he talked about trade agreements, military cooperation, and the shared values between the two nations. The audience listened carefully, some taking notes, while others held up their phones to record the historic moment. Behind Trump, standing perfectly still in their traditional red uniforms and tall black bearskin hats, were two royal guards. They stood like statues, their faces expressionless, their eyes fixed straight ahead. This was their duty, to stand watch during important state events without moving or showing any emotion, no matter what happened around them. As Trump continued his speech, he gestured with his hands, emphasizing his points about economic partnerships and future cooperation. The journalists in the front row leaned forward, eager to catch every word. Some of the diplomats nodded in agreement, while others maintained neutral expressions, as was expected in such formal settings. Suddenly, without warning, one of the royal guards took a step forward. The movement was small, but noticeable in the otherwise still and formal atmosphere. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Royal guards never moved during ceremonies. They were famous worldwide for their ability to remain completely motionless, even when tourists tried to make them laugh or react. Trump paused mid-sentence, turning slightly to see what had caused the disturbance. The guard took another step, then another. His face had gone pale, and small beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Something was clearly wrong. The second guard remained in position, but his eyes shifted slightly, breaking protocol to glance at his fellow soldier. The audience began to whisper more loudly now. Was this part of the ceremony? Was it some kind of protest? Security personnel around the room tensed, ready to respond if needed. The guard continued moving, his steps becoming less steady. He reached up with one gloved hand and touched his chest, his breathing becoming visible and labored. Trump stopped speaking completely now. Watching with concern as the young man struggled, without hesitation, Trump stepped away from the podium. His security detail immediately moved closer, but Trump waved them back slightly. He walked toward the guard, who was now swaying on his feet. The heavy bearskin hat, which weighed several pounds, combined with the thick wool uniform and the warm lights of the hall, had become too much for the young soldier. The room fell completely silent. Everyone watched as the President of the United States reached out and placed a steady hand on the guard's shoulder. The guard's knees began to buckle, and Trump quickly moved to support him. Helping to ease him down to a sitting position on the floor, royal protocol officers rushed forward, unsure of how to handle this unprecedented situation. Medical personnel, who were always present at such events, hurried toward them. But Trump remained crouched beside the guard, speaking to him in a low voice that the microphones couldn't pick up. The cameras continued to flash, capturing every moment of this unexpected scene. A member of the royal household staff brought water, which Trump took and helped the guard drink. The young man's color was slowly returning. Though he looked embarrassed and distressed at having broken his duty, Trump patted the guard's shoulder reassuringly before standing up to allow the medical team to take over. They checked the guard's vital signs and helped him remove the heavy bearskin hat. The guard tried to stand immediately, clearly worried about abandoning his post, but the medical staff gently insisted he remain seated. As the guard was being attended to, Trump returned to the podium. But instead of continuing with his prepared speech, he paused and looked out at the audience. The room was still buzzing with surprise and confusion about what they had just witnessed. Trump gripped the sides of the podium and spoke in a different tone than before, more personal and direct. He talked about the heat of the lights, the weight of duty, and how anyone could have found themselves in the same situation. He praised the dedication of the royal guards and all those who served in uniform. Standing watch to ensure the safety and dignity of important ceremonies, the guard was now being helped to his feet by the medical team. His face was red with embarrassment, but he stood at attention as best he could, even though the staff was trying to escort him out for further evaluation. Trump noticed this and made eye contact with the young man, giving him a nod of respect. What happened next surprised everyone even more. Trump asked that the guard's name be provided to him. An official quietly stepped forward and whispered to one of Trump's aides. The guard's name was James Mitchell, 23-year-old soldier who had been serving in the Royal Guard for 2 years. Trump publicly acknowledged James by name, thanking him for his service and dedication. He made a joke about the weight of those famous hats, which brought gentle laughter from the audience and seemed to ease some of the tension in the room. James managed a small, grateful smile before finally allowing himself to be escorted out for proper medical attention. The atmosphere in the hall had completely changed. What had started as a formal, somewhat stiff diplomatic speech had transformed into a moment of genuine human connection. The journalists were typing frantically on their phones and laptops. Knowing that this story would be headline news within minutes, Trump took a deep breath and looked down at his notes, then back up at the audience with a slight smile. The formal speech Trump had prepared suddenly seemed less important than what had just occurred. He decided to set aside his written notes and speak from the heart instead. The teleprompter still displayed his original speech, but Trump ignored them. Choosing to address the moment that everyone had just witnessed, he spoke about the pressures that come with public service. Whether you're a president, a soldier, or anyone working in the public eye. He talked about how people often forget that behind the uniforms and titles are real human beings with the same vulnerabilities as everyone else. The audience, which had been restless moments before, now listened with rapt attention. Outside the hall, news of the incident was already spreading across social media. Videos captured by journalists and guests were being shared thousands of times per minute. People around the world were watching as Trump helped the guard, analyzing every gesture and word. The reactions were mixed, as they often were with anything involving Trump. But many people were touched by the genuine concern he had shown back in the medical room adjacent to the main hall. James Mitchell sat on an examination table while a doctor checked his blood pressure and heart rate. He felt humiliated, knowing that he had failed in his duty to remain at his post. Royal Guards were supposed to be unshakable. Yet he had nearly fainted in front of the world's media and one of the most powerful men on earth. The doctor assured James that he was fine, explaining that the combination of standing completely still for extended periods, the heat from the television lights, and the weight of his uniform had caused a temporary drop in blood pressure. It was actually quite common, though it rarely happened during such high-profile events. The doctor recommended that James rest for at least 30 minutes before returning to any duties as James sat there, removing the thick wool tunic of his uniform to cool down. He couldn't stop replaying the moment in his mind. He had felt the dizziness coming on, but had tried to fight through it, as he had been trained to do. When he realized he was about to collapse, his training had kicked in, and he knew he needed to move rather than fall and potentially injure himself or cause an even bigger disruption. What? James couldn't shake was the memory of Trump's face when he turned around. Instead of annoyance at having his speech interrupted or confusion about what to do, Trump had shown immediate concern. The president had moved without hesitation, not worried about how it might look or whether it was the proper protocol. He had simply helped someone who needed help. Meanwhile, in the Grand Hall, Trump was wrapping up his speech. He had managed to return to some of his original talking points, but the tone of the entire event had shifted. What could have been a routine diplomatic address had become something more memorable and human. When Trump finished speaking, the applause was warmer and more genuine than it might have been otherwise. After the speech concluded, Trump was scheduled to have a private meeting with members of the royal family. As he was being escorted through the palace's ornate corridors, he asked one of his aides about the guard's condition. The aide made a quick phone call and reported back that James was recovering well and would be fine. Trump nodded but seemed to be thinking about something. He asked if it would be possible to speak with the guard before leaving the palace. His staff exchanged glances, unsure if this was appropriate or even allowed under royal protocol. They promised to make inquiries and see what could be arranged. In the media room, journalists were filing their stories with unprecedented speed. The footage of Trump helping the guard was being played on repeat on news channels around the world. Political commentators were already discussing what this moment meant, with some praising Trump's quick response and others questioning whether it was genuine or calculated for the cameras. On social media, the reactions were equally divided. Supporters shared the video as evidence of Trump's character and compassion. Critics remained skeptical, suggesting it was merely good publicity. But among the noise and partisan debate, many ordinary people simply saw a moment of basic human decency. Regardless of who was involved, the royal household staff were dealing with their own concerns. The incident had broken protocol in several ways. There would need to be discussions about how to prevent similar situations in the future. However, they were also relieved that the situation had been handled so smoothly and that James hadn't been seriously hurt. Queens. Officials were reviewing the footage to ensure that the palace and its guards were not portrayed in a negative light. They were pleased to see that Trump's response had actually deflected any potential criticism. Instead of the story being about a guard failing at his duty, it had become a story about compassion and human connection. Back in the medical room, James was feeling better physically but was dreading facing his superiors and fellow guards. He knew they would be professional and understanding, but he still felt he had let everyone down. A senior officer came to check on him, and while the conversation was serious, the officer assured James that no disciplinary action would be taken. These things happened, and what mattered was that James had handled it the best way he could under the circumstances. What James didn't know yet was that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The video of the incident was going viral, and he was becoming famous around the world. His face, which had remained so carefully expressionless during countless ceremonies, was now being seen by millions of people, showing very human vulnerability and relief. Trump's meeting with the royal family went well. Though everyone was still talking about the incident, the royals thanked Trump for his quick action and gracious handling of an awkward situation. Trump brushed off the thanks, saying it was simply the right thing to do and that he hoped the young guard was recovering well. As the afternoon wore on, Trump's staff confirmed that the palace had agreed to arrange a brief, private meeting between Trump and James before the president left for his next engagement. This was highly unusual, but given the circumstances and the media attention, it seemed like the appropriate gesture. James was informed of the upcoming meeting and felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. What would he say to the President of the United States? How could he explain what had happened? He was just a soldier doing his duty, and now he was caught up in an international news story. The palace staff prepared a small private room for the meeting between Trump and James. It was a modest space compared to the grand halls of the palace, with comfortable chairs, warm lighting, and paintings of historical military scenes on the walls. James was escorted there by his commanding officer, who gave him a reassuring pat on the back before stepping outside to wait. James stood at attention when Trump entered the room, accompanied only by a single aide. Trump immediately smiled and gestured for James to sit down. The formality that had surrounded them in the grand hall was gone, replaced by something more relaxed and genuine. Trump sat across from James and asked him how he was feeling. James, still somewhat overwhelmed, replied that he was fine, and apologized profusely for interrupting the speech. His voice carried the weight of his embarrassment, and he struggled to meet Trump's eyes. Trump waved away the apology with a dismissive hand gesture. He told James there was nothing to apologize for, that the human body has its limits, and that James had actually handled the situation with more grace than most people would have. Trump shared that he himself had experienced moments of physical difficulty during long events. The exhaustion that comes from standing under hot lights, maintaining perfect posture, and staying focused for hours. The conversation continued, and James began to relax slightly. Trump asked about his background, how long he had been serving, and what had made him want to become a royal guard. James explained that he had grown up in a small town in Yorkshire, and joining the military had been a family tradition. His grandfather had served, his father had served, and now he was carrying on that legacy. Trump listened with genuine interest, asking questions about James's training and what a typical day was like for a royal guard. James found himself opening up, talking about the pride he felt in wearing the uniform and being part of such an important tradition. Even though the work was often challenging and required incredible discipline as they talked, Trump's aide quietly took a few photos with his phone. These images would later be released to the press, showing Trump and James in conversation, both smiling. The photos would go viral, just like the video of the incident, but they would tell a different part of the story. Trump then surprised James by asking if there was anything he could do for him. James was taken aback by the question. He insisted that nothing was needed, that Trump had already done more than enough by checking on him and taking the time for this meeting. But Trump pressed the issue, saying that he wanted to do something meaningful. After some thought, James mentioned that he had a younger brother who was also hoping to join the military. The boy was 16 and absolutely idolized soldiers and servicemen. James said that if there was any way his brother could receive some kind of encouragement or recognition, it would mean the world to their family. Trump immediately took out his phone and asked for the brother's name and contact information. He promised to have something special arranged. James was stunned, not expecting such a personal gesture. Trump explained that he believed in supporting military families and that young people who wanted to serve their country deserved every bit of encouragement. The meeting lasted about 20 minutes, much longer than anyone had expected. When it was time for Trump to leave, he stood and shook James's hand firmly, looking him directly in the eye. Trump told James that he should be proud of his service and that what happened today didn't diminish his dedication or professionalism. In any way, James felt emotion welling up as he thanked Trump. The president had taken a moment that could have been humiliating and turned it into something else entirely. Instead of being remembered as the guard who fainted, James now had a story of compassion and respect that he would carry with him forever. After Trump left, James sat alone in the room for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. His commanding officer came in and asked how it went. James could only shake his head in amazement, saying that it was nothing like he had expected. The news of the private meeting was released to the media shortly afterward. It added another layer to the story that was already dominating news cycles around the world. Political analysts discussed what it meant for Trump's image. While ordinary people continued to share and comment on the videos and photos in the days that followed, James found himself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight. Journalists tried to contact him for interviews, and people recognized him on the street. The palace provided support and guidance on how to handle the attention. But it was still overwhelming for someone who had chosen a career that was supposed to be about blending into the background. James's family was incredibly supportive, though they too were adjusting to the sudden attention. His mother called him every day to make sure he was okay. His father, a retired soldier himself, told James that he had handled everything with honor and that the family was proud of him. James's younger brother, Tommy, was especially excited about everything that had happened. When James told him about Trump's promise to arrange something special, Tommy could barely contain his enthusiasm. The teenager had already watched the video of the incident dozens of times, showing it to all his friends at school. True to his word, Trump's staff followed up within a week. They arranged for Tommy to receive a personalized letter from the President of the United States, encouraging him in his ambitions to serve in the military. The letter was thoughtful and specific, mentioning Tommy by name and referencing his brother's dedication to duty. But Trump didn't stop there. He also arranged for Tommy to receive a special invitation to a military ceremony that would be taking place in London the following month, where he would have the opportunity to meet serving soldiers and learn more about military life. For a 16-year-old boy dreaming of a military career, it was beyond anything he could have imagined. When James learned about what Trump had done for his brother, he was deeply moved. The president had remembered a small conversation in a private room and had followed through on an offhand mention of a younger sibling. It was the kind of personal attention that James never expected from someone so powerful and busy. The story continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. Other soldiers and guards came forward with their own stories of difficult moments on duty, sharing how they had dealt with the physical and mental challenges of their work. The incident had opened up a conversation about the realities of military service that often went unspoken. Mental health advocates also seized on the story, using it to discuss the importance of recognizing human limitations and the need to support those in demanding professions. The fact that Trump had responded with compassion rather than criticism became a talking point in discussions about leadership and empathy. Back at the palace, changes were quietly being implemented to better support the guards during long ceremonies. More frequent rotation schedules were introduced, better hydration protocols were established, and medical staff were positioned even more strategically during events. James's incident, while embarrassing at the time, had led to improvements that would benefit countless guards in the future. Several weeks after the incident, James returned to his regular duties with the Royal Guard. His fellow soldiers had been supportive and understanding, though there were still occasional jokes about him being the most famous guard in the world. James took it all in good humor. Knowing that the ribbing came from a place of camaraderie, rather than cruelty, the attention from the media had finally started to die down. Though James still occasionally received requests for interviews, he had politely declined most of them, preferring to let his service speak for itself rather than becoming any more of a public figure than he already had. One evening, James received an unexpected phone call from Trump's office. At first, he thought it might be a prank, but the caller provided credentials and information that convinced him it was legitimate. Trump wanted to invite James and his family to Washington, D.C., as his guests for a special event honoring service members from allied nations. James was speechless. The invitation included flights, accommodation, and full access to the ceremony, which would be attended by military leaders from around the world. His entire family would be welcome to join him, including his younger brother Tommy, who had been counting down the days until his own military ceremony in London, after confirming with his superiors that he could take leave for the trip. James called his family with the news. His mother cried with joy. His father was rendered almost speechless. Tommy's excited shouts could be heard in the background. It was an opportunity that none of them had ever dreamed possible. The Mitchell family arrived in Washington, D.C. on a crisp autumn morning. They were met at the airport by a military liaison who escorted them to their hotel near the White House. The accommodations were far more luxurious than anything they were accustomed to, and Tommy spent the first hour exploring every corner of their suite. The ceremony was scheduled for the following evening, giving the family a day to see some of the city's famous landmarks. They visited the Lincoln Memorial, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and Arlington National Cemetery. For James and his father, both military men, walking among the graves of fallen soldiers was a profound and emotional experience. Tommy was particularly moved by everything he saw. The teenager had always been serious about his desire to join the military, but experiencing the weight of military history and sacrifice in person seemed to deepen his resolve. He asked his brother countless questions about service, duty, and what it meant to wear the uniform. That evening, as they prepared for the ceremony, James felt nervous in a way he hadn't expected. He had stood before crowds thousands of times as a royal guard, but this felt different. He would be attending as a guest rather than a silent sentinel, and he knew that Trump would likely acknowledge him in some way. The ceremony took place in a beautiful hall, decorated with flags from dozens of nations. Military personnel in various uniforms filled the room, creating a tapestry of international service and cooperation. The Mitchell family was seated in a place of honor. Close to the front, where they could see everything clearly, Trump arrived and began the ceremony with a speech about the importance of alliances and the bonds between service members across borders. He talked about courage, dedication, and the sacrifices made by military families who supported their loved ones in uniform. James found himself deeply moved by the words, feeling seen and understood in a way that transcended politics or nationality. Then Trump did something unexpected. He called James up to the stage. James's heart pounded as he made his way forward, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes watching him. When he reached the stage, Trump shook his hand warmly and addressed the audience. Trump told the story of what had happened at Buckingham Palace. but he framed it differently than the media had. He didn't focus on the dramatic moment or the viral videos. Instead, he talked about the dedication required to stand watch, the weight of duty that all service members carry, and the importance of supporting one another. When human limitations are reached, Trump then presented James with a special commendation for his service, recognizing not just his years as a royal guard, but his representation of the professionalism and dedication of military personnel everywhere. The audience rose in applause, and James felt tears prick his eyes as he accepted the award. But Trump wasn't finished. He invited Tommy to join them on stage as well. The teenager, wide-eyed and nervous, made his way forward. Trump placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder and spoke about the importance of encouraging young people who wanted to serve. He presented Tommy with a certificate of recognition for his commitment to following in his family's footsteps. The moment was captured by dozens of cameras. But unlike the viral videos from Buckingham Palace, these images showed something planned and intentional. They showed a powerful leader taking time to honor ordinary people who embodied values of service and sacrifice. After the ceremony, there was a reception where the Mitchell family had the opportunity to meet military leaders from various countries. They heard stories from soldiers who had served in conflicts around the world. They shared their own family's military history. It was an evening of connection and mutual respect that transcended borders and ranks. Later, Trump took time to speak privately with the Mitchell family. He asked James about his recovery and his return to duty, seeming genuinely interested in how things had gone. He talked with Tommy about his plans for military service, offering advice and encouragement. He even spent time chatting with James's parents, thanking them for raising sons who wanted to serve. James's mother, overcome with emotion, thanked Trump for everything he had done for her family. She explained that the attention and recognition had been overwhelming at times, but that the kindness and respect Trump had shown had turned what could have been a humiliating incident into something meaningful and positive. Trump seemed touched by her words. He explained that he had simply done what he thought was right in the moment, without thinking about cameras or publicity. Helping someone who needed help was basic human decency. And he was glad that something good had come from the situation. As the evening drew to a close, the Mitchell family took photos with Trump and various military officials. These would become treasured memories, displayed proudly in their home for years to come. But more valuable than any photo was the experience itself and the connections they had made. The next day, before the family returned to England, they were given a private tour of the White House. Tommy was especially fascinated, asking questions about the history and the people who had lived and worked there. Their guide was patient and knowledgeable, making the experience educational as well as memorable. On the flight home, James reflected on everything that had happened since that moment at Buckingham Palace. What had started as one of the most embarrassing experiences of his life had transformed into something remarkable. He had been shown kindness when he expected criticism, offered opportunity when he expected nothing, and given memories that would last a lifetime. His father, sitting beside him on the plane, must have sensed what James was thinking. The older man squeezed his son's shoulder and said that James had handled everything with honor and dignity. The incident at the palace had revealed James's humanity, but everything since had revealed his character. Back in England, life gradually returned to normal for James, though he found that normal had been redefined in subtle ways. His experience had changed him, not dramatically, in the quiet manner that comes from gaining new perspective on what matters in life. James continued his duties as a royal guard with renewed purpose. The incident, and everything that followed, had reminded him why he had chosen this path. It wasn't just about standing still in an impressive uniform or being part of centuries-old traditions. It was about service, dedication, and representing something larger than himself. His fellow guards treated him no differently than before, which James appreciated. The military had a way of bringing people back down to earth. His colleagues made sure he didn't develop a swelled head from all the attention. They joked that he had found a creative way to get out of standing duty. But the humor was affectionate and helped James feel fully reintegrated into his unit. However, James did notice changes in how the public responded to royal guards in general. The incident had humanized them in the eyes of many people. Tourists who came to watch the changing of the guard seemed more respectful, more aware that the still figures in red uniforms were real people with real challenges. Some visitors even made a point of thanking the guards for their service, though protocol prevented the guards from responding. Tommy, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity at his school. His peers were amazed that his brother had met the President of the United States, and even more impressed that Tommy himself had been recognized at a ceremony in Washington. But what mattered most to Tommy was that the experience had solidified his determination to serve. The teenager threw himself into preparing for his military career with renewed focus. He improved his physical fitness, studied military history, and sought advice from his father and brother about what to expect. The letter and certificate from Trump hung, framed on his bedroom wall. Daily reminders of the path he had chosen. James's parents watched their sons with quiet pride. They had always supported their children's ambitions, but the events of recent months had shown them that their values of service and dedication were being recognized. Beyond their small community, James's mother kept a scrapbook of all the newspaper articles and printed photos from the various events, creating a family history that future generations would treasure. Several months after the Washington ceremony, James received another surprise. He was invited to speak at a military school where young people were training to become officers. The school wanted him to share his story and talk about the realities of military service, both the challenges and the rewards. James was nervous about public speaking, having spent his career being seen but not heard, but he accepted the invitation, feeling it was important to give back and perhaps help inspire the next generation of service members. He spent weeks preparing his remarks, wanting to get the message right when the day came. James stood before an auditorium full of young cadets, their faces eager and attentive. He told them about his journey to becoming a Royal Guard, training and discipline required, and the pride he felt in serving. Then he talked about that day at Buckingham Palace, describing honestly what he had felt and experienced. James explained that the incident had taught him several important lessons. First, that everyone has limits, and recognizing them isn't weakness, but wisdom. Second, that how people respond to unexpected situations reveals their true character. And third, that kindness and respect can transform difficult moments into opportunities for growth and connection. He told the cadets about Trump's response, not to glorify any individual, but to illustrate what good leadership looks like. A leader who sees the person inside the uniform, who responds with compassion rather than criticism, and who follows through on promises made in private moments. These were qualities James hoped the future officers would embody in their own careers. The students asked many questions afterward. Some wanted to know about the physical demands of being a Royal Guard. Others asked about dealing with public attention. Several asked how James had maintained his composure during such an embarrassing moment. James answered each question thoughtfully, drawing on his experience to provide honest and helpful responses. The talk was well received. James was invited to speak at other military schools and events. He discovered that he had a gift for connecting with young people, considering military service. And he found fulfillment in this unexpected role as a mentor and example. Meanwhile, the relationship between James and the Trump family continued in small but meaningful ways. Trump's staff would occasionally reach out to check on James and his family. During military holidays, James would receive messages of appreciation. These gestures were private and unpublicized, which made them feel even more genuine. When Tommy finally enlisted in the military at 18, following in his brother's footsteps, Trump sent a personal congratulatory message. The note was brief but sincere, wishing Tommy success in his training and thanking him for his commitment to service. Tommy carried that letter with him throughout his basic training, a source of motivation during difficult moments. James attended Tommy's graduation from basic training with his parents, watching with pride as his younger brother stood at attention in his new uniform. He remembered his own graduation years earlier, the sense of accomplishment and purpose he had felt. Now he was seeing Tommy experience that same transformation from civilian to soldier. After the ceremony, as the family celebrated Tommy's achievement, James reflected on how interconnected everything had become. A moment of weakness at Buckingham Palace had led to meeting Trump, which had led to opportunities and connections that had enriched their entire family's life. It was a reminder that we never know how the difficult moments in our lives might ultimately lead to unexpected blessings. The story of Trump and the Royal Guard continued to circulate on social media years later, often resurfacing when people discussed leadership, compassion, or viral moments. Each time it appeared, James would receive a few messages from people who had been moved by the story or who wanted to share how it had impacted them, some people wrote. To say that the incident had changed how they thought about service members and the challenges they face. Others shared that it had inspired them to respond with more kindness in their own lives. When they encountered people in difficult situations, a few even said it had influenced their decision to pursue military service themselves. James was always humbled by these messages. He had never sought attention or recognition, and the fact that a challenging moment in his life had somehow inspired others was both surprising and gratifying. It reinforced his belief that our struggles, when faced with dignity and met with compassion, can become sources of encouragement for others. In his continuing service as a Royal Guard, James carried these lessons with him. He stood watch with the same dedication as always, but with a deeper appreciation for the human element of military service. He looked out for his fellow guards, quick to notice when someone might be struggling and ready to offer support when needed. The Royal Guard unit had implemented the changes suggested after James's incident, and while there were still occasional moments when guards faced physical challenges, the improved protocols meant they were better supported. James took satisfaction in knowing that his difficult experience had led to positive changes that would benefit countless others. 5 years after the incident at Buckingham Palace, James Mitchell stood in the same grand hall where his life had changed. He was no longer a young guard, uncertain of his place in the world. Now he was a sergeant, responsible for training and leading new guards as they learned the traditions and disciplines of their role. The occasion was another state visit, though this time the visiting dignitary was not Trump. James stood at the back of the room, supervising rather than standing watch, his role having evolved with his rank and experience. He watched the young guards at their posts, remembering what it felt like to stand there. The weight of the uniform, the heat of the lights, the pressure to remain perfectly still during a break in the ceremonies. James walked through the palace corridors, finding himself drawn to the spot where he had nearly collapsed all those years ago. He stood there for a moment, remembering the dizziness, the embarrassment, and then the unexpected kindness that had followed. It felt like another lifetime. Yet the lessons from that day remained fresh and relevant. One of the young guards James was training, a 19-year-old named David, approached him nervously. David confided that he was struggling with the physical demands of the long ceremonies and was afraid of embarrassing himself. He had heard the stories about James but didn't know if they were true. James smiled and confirmed that yes, the stories were true. He had indeed nearly fainted during a presidential speech, and yes, Trump had helped him. But more importantly, James told David he had learned that acknowledging your limits and asking for help wasn't failure. It was wisdom. He shared the strategies that had been implemented since his incident and assured David that the guard community would support him. David's relief was visible. He thanked James and returned to his duties with renewed confidence. James watched him go, realizing that his experience had given him the ability to help others in ways he never could have before. The embarrassing moment had become a gift that kept giving, allowing him to connect with and support fellow guards who faced similar challenges. Tommy, now 23, had followed through on his military ambitions and was serving with distinction in his own unit. He had been deployed overseas twice and had earned commendations for his service. The brothers spoke regularly, sharing the unique bond that comes from both understanding military life and having experienced an extraordinary chapter together. Tommy often told his fellow soldiers about the time his brother met the President of the United States and how that meeting had inspired his own path. He kept the certificate Trump had given him all those years ago, now worn and creased from being carried through multiple deployments. It reminded him that leaders should care about the people they lead. not just as soldiers or workers, but as human beings. James's parents had aged gracefully, their pride in their sons evident to everyone who knew them. They had created a small display in their home with photos and mementos from the incredible journey that began with a moment of weakness at Buckingham Palace. Visitors always wanted to hear the story, and James's mother never tired of telling it. The media occasionally revisited the story, especially around anniversaries or when discussions about leadership and compassion arose in political discourse. The video of Trump helping James had become one of those timeless moments that transcended political divisions, reminding people of shared humanity in an increasingly polarized world. James had been interviewed a few more times over the years, always reluctantly, but recognizing that his story seemed to resonate with people. He tried to use these opportunities to highlight the broader issues of military service, the importance of supporting service members, and the value of responding to difficulty with compassion rather than judgment. In one particularly meaningful interview, James was asked what he would say to Trump if he could speak to him again. James thought carefully before answering. He said he would thank Trump not just for the help in that moment, but for following through with genuine care and attention afterward. Those actions had shown James what leadership should look like. He tried to embody those same qualities in his own role as a sergeant. The interviewer then asked if James had any regrets about what happened. James answered honestly that while the incident had been embarrassing and difficult at the time, he wouldn't change it even if he could. The experience had taught him invaluable lessons, opened unexpected doors, and given him a story that helped inspire and connect with others. Sometimes our most challenging moments become our greatest teachers. As James continued his service, he found satisfaction in the simple rhythms of military life, the ceremonies, the training, the camaraderie with fellow guards, and the knowledge that he was part of something larger than himself. The viral fame had been strange and uncomfortable, but it had faded, leaving behind something more substantial and lasting. He had learned that true leadership meant seeing people as individuals, not just as their roles or positions. He had learned that kindness costs nothing but can mean everything to someone struggling. And he had learned that vulnerability, when met with compassion, can create connections that transcend differences of nationality, status, or politics. James often thought about that day at Buckingham Palace and the chain of events it had set in motion. A moment of physical weakness had revealed strength of character in unexpected places. A viral video had sparked conversations about empathy and humanity. A brief interaction between a president and a guard had rippled outward, touching lives around the world in small but meaningful ways. On quiet evenings, James would sometimes watch the video that had started it all. He could see himself swaying, Trump turning, the moment of decision when the president chose to help rather than judge. Every time he watched it, he noticed something new in Trump's expression, a genuine concern that couldn't be faked or manufactured for cameras. James also noticed something else in the video that he had never paid attention to before. In the background, among the crowd of diplomats and journalists, there were faces showing various reactions. Some looked concerned, others confused, a few appeared annoyed at the interruption, but many showed the same human compassion that Trump had demonstrated. Wanting to help but uncertain how, this observation reminded James that most people, given the chance, want to do the right thing. They want to help when someone is struggling. They want to show kindness rather than judgment. Sometimes all it takes is one person to set the example, to break through the barriers of protocol and formality, and others will follow. Years later, when James eventually retired from active duty as a Royal Guard, he was honored in a small ceremony attended by his family, fellow guards, and military officials. The commanding officer spoke about James's years of dedicated service, his role in improving support systems for guards, and his work mentoring young soldiers. But what the officer emphasized most was the character James had shown throughout his career, especially during that difficult moment at Buckingham Palace and in all the years that followed. James had faced an embarrassing situation with dignity, accepted unexpected attention with humility, and used his experience to help others. These were the qualities of a true soldier and leader. Tommy attended his brother's retirement ceremony in his own military uniform, standing at attention as James was honored. Their parents sat in the front row, tears in their eyes as they watched their eldest son conclude this chapter of his life. The journey from that young man nearly fainting at Buckingham Palace to this respected sergeant being honored for his service had been remarkable to witness. In his brief remarks at the ceremony, James thanked everyone who had supported him throughout his career. He mentioned his family, his fellow guards, his commanders, and even Trump, whose unexpected kindness had taught him so much about leadership and human connection. He encouraged the young guards present to remember that their strength came not from never struggling, but from how they handled struggles when they came. After retiring from active guard duty, James took a position training new recruits, passing on decades of experience and wisdom. He loved this work, shaping the next generation of guards and instilling in them not just the technical skills they needed, but the values of service, compassion, and mutual support. The story of Trump and the Royal Guard had become a teaching tool that James used with new recruits. He would show them the video and discuss what it revealed about pressure, physical limits, and good leadership. The recruits always paid close attention, knowing they were hearing firsthand from someone who had lived through a moment that had touched millions of people. James's life had been profoundly shaped by a single incident, but not in the way anyone might have expected. What could have been merely an embarrassing story became a testament to human dignity, compassion, the unexpected connections that can form when people choose kindness over judgment. As James looked back on everything, he realized that the real story wasn't about a president helping a guard or a viral video or any of the external events. The real story was about human beings recognizing each other's humanity across all the barriers that usually keep us apart. It was about choosing compassion in moments when criticism would be easier. It was about following through on kindness even when the cameras stopped rolling. These were the lessons James carried forward, teaching them to everyone he encountered. And in doing so, the ripple effects of that day at Buckingham Palace continued to spread, touching new lives and inspiring new acts of kindness year after year. Long after the video stopped trending and the headlines moved on to other stories, the moment of weakness had become a legacy of strength in James Mitchell. Once just another royal guard standing at attention, had become a living reminder that our most vulnerable moments, when met with grace, can become our most powerful testimonies to the goodness that exists in the world.